The Arizona Territory of 1878 wasn't a land of mercy. It was a sun-scorched anvil that broke the weak and forged the desperate. For Eliza Turner, a widow trapped by grief on 1,000 acres of dust, the world had shrunk to the 4 walls of her silent cabin. But mercy arrived in a way she never expected. It came in the form of a man she was taught to hate, an Apache warrior, gut-shot and dying by her dry well. She had a choice: let the desert claim him or risk her life for his. That choice didn't just save his life. It forged a legend. The silence of the high desert was a living thing. It was a predator stalking the edges of Turner's Hollow, waiting for the last echo of life to fade. Eliza Turner knew the sound of it. She had lived with it for 6 months, ever since the day they brought Mark home, broken and lifeless from the canyon floor. A riding accident, they'd said. But Mark was the best horseman in the county. The silence that followed his burial was heavier than the casket, more oppressive than the August heat. She was 24 years old, a widow. The word felt like ash in her mouth. Her world was now a small, sturdy cabin Mark had built with his own hands, a dusty barn, a dry well, and 100 skinny cattle she didn't know how to sell. On this day, the sky was a bruised, yellowish purple. A dust storm was coming. The air crackled with a dry electric tension. Eliza moved with an economy of motion, taught by grief and necessity. She secured the latch on the chicken coop. She double-checked the boards on the barn windows. She pulled her worn shawl tighter, her gaze sweeping the jagged line of the Dragoon Mountains, blue and distant. The wind hit first as a whisper, then a shriek. The world vanished in a swirling wall of red grit. For hours the cabin groaned as the storm tried to peel the shingles from the roof. Eliza sat at her small table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, Mark's old .44-70 Sharps rifle leaning against the wall beside her. She wasn't afraid of the storm. She was afraid of the silence that would follow. As twilight fell, the wind began to die, its scream lowering to a mournful moan. And through the moan she heard it. Thump, a dull, heavy sound from outside. Not a rock, not a branch. Scrape, thump. Eliza's heart leaped into her throat. She wasn't alone. She grabbed the Sharps, its weight a cold comfort. She moved to the window, wiping a small circle of grime away. The world outside was a ghostly landscape of red dust, the air still thick. She saw nothing, but she'd heard it. Coyotes were smarter than to come this close during a storm. "Who's there?" Her voice was a dry rasp. Only the wind answered. She waited. An hour. 2. The moon, a sickly crescent, tried to pierce the haze. The silence she dreaded had returned, but now it was different. It was an expectant silence. She couldn't spend the night wondering. Her nerves, stretched thin for half a year, would snap. With the heavy rifle in her arms, she unbarred the door. The hinges whined. The cold, dust-filled air hit her face. She stepped onto the porch. "I'm armed!" she yelled, trying to sound braver than she felt. She scanned the yard, the wagon, the woodpile, the empty trough. And then, the well. Slumped against the dry, stacked stones of the well was a shape, a human shape. She raised the rifle, her hands shaking. "Don't move!" The figure didn't. Slowly, her boots crunching on the gritty sand, she approached. It was a man, face down in the dirt. He wore buckskin leggings and a tattered cotton shirt. His black hair was matted with blood and mud. She nudged him with the toe of her boot, a low groan, almost inhuman. She knelt, grabbing his shoulder, and pulled him over. Her breath hitched. She nearly dropped the gun. He was Apache. His face was a mask of sweat, dust, and agony, but his features were sharp, unmistakable. The enemy. The savage that the papers in Tucson warned about. The reason Mark always kept the sharps loaded. Her entire body screamed danger. Run. Bar the door. Let the desert have him. But then she saw the wound. His shirt was soaked through with a dark, sticky stain on his right side. A gut shot. A festering, stinking wound that looked days old. His skin was hot to the touch, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was dying. Not a warrior. Not an enemy. Just a man, burning with fever, dying in her yard. She looked at his face again. He couldn't have been much older than her. 25, maybe 30. His eyes fluttered open, dark and clouded with delirium, but they held no malice. Only pain. Eliza stood torn. All her learned fear, all the stories of raids and massacres, warred with the simple, stark reality of the man at her feet. She remembered holding Mark's cold hand, the awful helplessness of watching life flee. This man was dying, but she could do something. "Damn it all," she whispered to the wind. She hooked her arms under his. He was heavier than he looked, all wiry muscle. "You'd better not live to make me regret this." She grunted and began to drag him out of the dust. She didn't take him into the house. Fear ingrained and potent wouldn't allow that. The house was her sanctuary, Mark's sanctuary. Instead, she dragged him to the small windowless root cellar, set 20 yards from the cabin. It was cool dark, and the only other defensible spot on the property. It took her nearly 10 minutes. His body left a dark trail in the dust. She lit a kerosene lamp, the yellow glow illuminating a small earthen room smelling of potatoes and damp soil. She laid him on a pile of old burlap sacks. His breathing was a ragged hitch. Now that he was in the light, she saw the full extent of the damage. The wound was septic, a ragged hole, puckered, and angry Cividio. The smell of infection was overwhelming. He would be dead by morning. "Lord, what am I doing?" she murmured. She ran back to the cabin, her mind racing. She grabbed the necessities Mark's old surgical kit from his time in the war, a bottle of whiskey-clean rags, and the small tin of carbolic acid she used for the livestock. For the next hour, Eliza Turner went to war. She ripped his shirt open. His body was lean, scarred. She poured the whiskey straight into the wound. The man, deep in his delirium, arched off the burlap with a strangled scream. His eyes flew open. He didn't see her. He saw phantoms. He began to speak a torrent of guttural, rapid words she couldn't understand. "Apache. Hold still, damn you," she ordered, her voice trembling as she pressed him down with one hand. She had to find the bullet. She took a breath, sterilized a probe in the lamp's flame, and went in. The man thrashed his words, turning to pained chants. Eliza gritted her teeth, tears of sweat and panic stinging her eyes. She felt the probe hit something hard. Lead! She worked quickly, her hands surprisingly steady. This was like carving a breached cow, she told herself. Just blood and muscle. Just a problem to be solved. She finally pulled the mangled piece of lead free, dropping it with a tink into a metal bowl. She cleaned the wound again, packed it with rags soaked in the carbolic solution, and bound his waist tightly. He had fallen silent, his body limp. His fever still raged. She sat back on her heels, covered in his sweat, and blood shaking. He was alive. Barely. She dipped a rag in her bucket of clean water and began to wipe the grime from his face and chest. He was just a boy, she thought. The hard lines of his face were softened by the fever. As she wiped his chest, her fingers brushed against a thin leather thong around his neck, tucked under his skin. Curiosity, or perhaps a need to see him as human, made her pull it out. It was not a totem. It was not a beadwork fetish. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, the kind a white woman would wear. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp. It snapped open. Inside, protected by a piece of cracked glass, was a tiny, faded tintype photograph. Eliza held it to the light, her blood running cold. It was a portrait of a young woman. Not an Apache. A white woman with pale skin, fair hair, pinned up, and a shy smile. This was the first twist. The man she had identified as a savage, a mortal enemy, was carrying the picture of a white woman in a locket. Who was this man? He began to mutter again. His delirium was breaking. His eyes focused hazy at first, then sharp. He saw her. He saw the larceny in her hand. With a speed that defied his condition, his hand shot out and clamped around her wrist. His grip was like a steel trap. His eyes burned with a cold, clear fire. He said one word, not in Apache, but in perfect, unaccented English. "Give it back." Eliza froze the locket, digging into her palm. The man's grip was unbreakable. The voice, clear, educated, and laced with iron, was more shocking than the Apache chants. "Please!" He ground out the single word costing him. He relaxed his grip, his body slumping as the effort drained him. Eliza, stunned, slowly uncurled her fingers and placed the locket on his chest. I'm sorry. I was cleaning the wound." His eyes closed. "Water." She scrambled to her feet, her mind spinning. She fetched a cup from the cabin. When she returned, she had to lift his head to help him drink. He drank greedily, then coughed a dry, painful rack. "Who are you?" she whispered. He just stared at the ceiling, his breathing labored. "You should have let me die." "I considered it," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Who is she?" "The woman in the locket." A long silence stretched in the cellar's dim light. "My wife," he finally said, his voice flat. "Sarah." "Sarah," Eliza repeated. "A white woman." Half he corrected. "Mission raised, like me." This was the second twist, the one that unraveled everything Eliza thought she knew. "You were at a mission." "Carlisle," he said, naming the famous Indian school in Pennsylvania. "They called me Jacob, taught me English, taught me their Bible, taught me to hate my own skin." He turned his head, looking at her for the first time. It didn't take. "My name is Coda," he said. "I'm Eliza Turner." For 3 days, a tense truce held in the root cellar. Eliza brought him broth and fresh water. She changed his bandages. The fever broke, leaving him weak but lucid. The silence between them was thick with questions. He was a paradox, a man who could chant Apache war songs in a fever and quote Shakespeare when lucid. She learned a lost soul, in his own words. "My people," he said on the 3rd day, his voice stronger, "call me he who walks between. The white men call me a renegade. I was cast out by my uncle. He said the mission school had poisoned my blood." "And Sarah?" Eliza asked, sitting on an old crate, keeping a careful distance. Coda's face hardened. "We met at Carlisle. She was the only thing that made sense. When we came back west, my people wouldn't have her. Her people wouldn't have me. So we made our own place. Like this, a small ranch up by the Gila River." He paused, the memory twisting his features. "It was good, for a year." "What happened?" "The bounty hunters," he whispered, his voice turning to gravel. "Men who get paid for scalps. They don't care what kind of Indian. Man, woman, child. They found our ranch." Eliza felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "They came at dawn," Coda continued, his eyes fixed on the cellar's wooden ceiling. "Led by a man with a silver-plated pistol. He made me watch. They killed her because she was with me. They burned my home." "But you escaped," Eliza said. "I wasn't there." He choked out, the shame and rage thick in his voice. "I was in the mountains, hunting. I came back. To To nothing. And the wound, I've been hunting them ever since. The Blackwater gang. I found them 2 weeks ago near Tucson. I was careless. Got too close. One of their outriders shot me. He had been riding for 2 weeks, gut shot, running on pure hatred, before collapsing at her well. He was an outcast, driven not by savagery, but by a grief as deep and hollow as her own. The man with the silver pistol, Eliza asked. Do you know his name? Coda's eyes met hers, and the raw hatred in them made her flinch. I know his name, he said. I hear it in my sleep. His name is Silas Croft. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, a small gasp escaping. Her blood turned to ice. Coda saw her reaction. You know him. It wasn't a question. He's been here, Eliza stammered. He came by after Mark's, after my husband's accident. He offered to buy my ranch. Protection, he said. I know that name. Silas Croft. Everyone in Prospect Creek knows him. Coda struggled to sit up, his face pale. This man Croft, he is here. He runs the Blackwater gang, Eliza said, her voice shaking. They're not just bounty hunters. They're extortionists, rustlers. A horrifying thought, a dark seed of suspicion she had buried for 6 months, bloomed in her mind. Mark. The best horseman in the county. A riding accident. Croft showing up a week later, offering to buy her land for pennies on the dollar. Coda saw the realization dawn on her face. He was a lost soul. She was a grieving widow. But they were not enemies. They were, she realized with dawning terror, survivors of the same man. Survival forced Eliza's hand. Coda was healing, but he was burning through her meager supplies. The jerky was gone, the flour sack was nearly empty, and she needed more laudanum to keep his pain at bay, and more carbolic to keep the infection from returning. She had to go to town. Prospect Creek was a single dusty street carved into the landscape, a temporary scar that threatened to become permanent. It was a town of 20 buildings, 15 of which were saloons or assay offices. Eliza tied her horse Bess to the hitching rail in front of McPherson's General Store. She kept her head down, her sunbonnet pulled low, and walked past the saloon. Even at 10 in the morning, the tinny sound of a piano and raucous laughter spilled out. She saw them. 4 men, their horses lathered, were tying up outside the saloon. They wore dusty black dusters despite the heat. The Blackwater gang. Her stomach clenched. She hurried inside the store. Mr. McPherson, a bald-headed man with a nervous twitch, nodded to her. Mornin', Mrs. Turner. Hard times. Morning, Mr. McPherson, she said, sliding her small list onto the counter. Just the essentials. Flour, coffee, salt, and a bottle of laudanum. McPherson raised an eyebrow. Grief still heavy. Mrs. Turner. For my nerves. She lied, her face flushing. And a tin of carbolic acid. The lye soap, too. He began to gather her things. The bell on the store door jangled. The laughter and loud talk from the street entered with him. The smell of cheap whiskey sweat and cigar smoke filled the small store. Well, if it ain't the widow Turner. Eliza's heart stopped. She turned slowly. Silas Croft filled the doorway. He was not what she expected. He wasn't a brutish thug. He was handsome, almost refined. He wore a clean black coat, a brocade vest, and a string tie. His blonde hair was meticulously combed, and on his hip, just as Coda had described, was a Colt pistol with a gleaming, silver-plated grip. His smile was bright, but it didn't reach his cold blue eyes. Mr. Croft, Eliza said, her voice barely a whisper. Still holding on out at the hollow, are we? He said, his voice a smooth baritone. He walked closer, picking up an apple from a barrel and polishing it on his vest. It's a hard life for a woman alone. My offer still stands, cash in hand. You could be on a train back east by Sunday. I am not selling Mr. Croft. The ranch was my husband's. Your husband is gone, Croft said, his voice hardening for a split second before the smile returned. And this land, it isn't safe. The Apache are restless. Word is a renegade buck's been seen in the dragoons. A real killer. He leaned in, his voice dropping. I'm offering you protection, Eliza. I'd hate to see such a lovely piece of property fall into the wrong hands. Or worse. Eliza's hand resting on the counter was shaking. She curled it into a fist. She thought of Coda, of his murdered wife. She thought of Mark, broken at the bottom of the canyon. Are you threatening me, Mr. Croft? His smile widened. I am assuring you. Think on my offer. He turned to McPherson, who was pretending to be busy arranging cans. Put her supplies on my account, McPherson. No, Eliza said too quickly. I can pay my own way. Croft turned back his gaze, sharp. It travelled from her defiant face to the items on the counter. Flour, coffee, salt, laudanum, and a large tin of carbolic acid. His eyes lingered on the medical supplies. That's a curious order, Mrs. Turner, he said, the smile gone. Lot of medicine for one person. You ain't got a guest, do you? Someone who might have run into some trouble. The air in the store was so thick Eliza could barely breathe. McPherson looked like he was about to faint. I'm dosing a sick calf, Mr. Croft, Eliza said, her voice surprisingly steady. It took a tumble in the arroyo. Wounds gone bad. She met his gaze. The cold blue eyes stared into hers, searching, probing. A calf, he repeated, a slow drawl. A calf, she affirmed. He stared for another 10 seconds, an eternity. Then he laughed, a short barking sound. A sick calf. Well, don't let it die. Good stock is hard to come by. He tipped his hat. Ma'am. He and his men strode out, their spurs jingling. Eliza watched them mount up and ride out of town, heading south, away from her ranch. She let out the breath she'd been holding and leaned against the counter, her knees weak. Mrs. Turner, McPherson whispered. That man. He ain't no rancher. You take care. I know, Mr. McPherson, she said, gathering her bags. I know. She rode Bess hard, all the way back to the hollow, the dust from Croft's gang, a fading plume in the distance. But she wasn't relieved. She was terrified. She had lied to Silas Croft, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that he hadn't believed a word of it. She half ran, half stumbled into the root cellar. Coda was on his feet, leaning against the wall, his face tight with pain, but his eyes alert. He had seen her ride in. You saw him, Coda stated. He was in town, Eliza said, her voice frantic as she dropped the supplies. He knows something. He saw me buying the laudanum. He asked if I had a guest. He will come, Coda said. It was a simple fact. We have to leave. You have to leave. Now. I can saddle Bess. You can... And go where? Coda cut her off, his voice sharp. I am too weak to ride far, and he will hunt me. And when he finds my trail leading from your ranch, what do you think he will do to you? Eliza's blood ran cold. He was right. She was already an accomplice. He's the one. Eliza said, the suspicion she'd held for 6 months finally becoming a terrible certainty. My husband, Mark. He didn't fall. Croft's men were rustling our cattle. Mark must have caught them. They murdered him and made it look like an accident. She had grieved a tragedy. She had been living with the consequences of a murder. Coda looked at her, his expression softening for the first time. He saw the same pain, the same hollowed-out grief that lived inside him. So, he said quietly, we are the same. We are both ghosts, haunted by the same man. A profound shift happened in the damp, dark cellar. The last barrier between them, race fear culture, evaporated. They were no longer a white widow and an Apache warrior. They were two people with a shared enemy. "He thinks I'm a weak woman," Eliza said, her fear calcifying into a hard, cold rage. "He thinks you're a dying animal. He's wrong." "He will come with his whole gang," Coda warned. "He will not be careless. Not this time." "Then we don't be careless either," Eliza said, her eyes finding the Sharps rifle she'd left by the cellar door. "This is my land, Mark's land. I will not be run off it." Coda nodded slowly. "Your land, your weapons, but my fight." "Our fight," she corrected. A new light entered his eyes. The lost soul, driven only by a blind, self-destructive vengeance, was gone. In his place was a strategist. "He will come," Coda said, "but he will come on our terms." For the next 2 days, the Hollow was transformed. Coda, though still weak, was a different man. He was focused, energized. His pain was channeled. He was no longer just a patient. He was a teacher. "He will expect you in the house," Coda said, moving around the yard, his eyes cataloguing every rock, every dip in the land. "He will expect me in the barn. We will be in neither." "Where then?" "The hunter." Coda explained, never attacks from where the prey is looking. He attacks from the sky, from the earth. He took her to the small rocky outcrop about 100 yards from the cabin. It overlooked the whole yard, the only approach. "Here, this is your nest." He handed her the 44-70 Sharps. "You know how to use this?" "Mark taught me. I can hit $1 at 200 yards. "Good," Coda said. "Do not shoot to kill. Shoot to break. Hit their horses. A man on foot in the desert is a man already dead. A man who sees his horse fall panics." He then went to work. He didn't build a fortress. He set traps. He used Eliza's tools, his Apache knowledge. He weakened the supports on the small porch just enough. He dug shallow pits, covered with brush on the blind side of the barn. He moved her cattle trough to create a bottleneck. He was, Eliza realized, an artist, and the medium was war. He also trained her. "Stop walking like a cow," he ordered. "You make too much noise. Walk on the balls of your feet. Listen." He would stop, holding up a hand. "What do you hear?" "The wind," she'd say. "No. Listen under the wind. A hawk 2 miles east. A lizard on the rocks. You must hear them before they arrive." He moved like smoke, his injuries barely seeming to slow him. He was teaching her how to survive. He was giving her the tools of his people. In return, she was giving him something he'd lost: a purpose, beyond revenge. He wasn't just saving himself, he was saving her. The turning was complete. On the evening of the second day, Eliza was cleaning the Sharps, her hands steady, her nerves humming with a cold, focused energy. "Coda," she said, "when this is over, what will you do?" He was sharpening a long-bladed knife. He didn't look up. "I do not know. I have not thought. After." "Sarah," Eliza said softly, "revenge won't bring her back, just as killing Croft won't bring Mark back." He stopped sharpening. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "No," he said. "It will not. But it will stop him from making more ghosts." He pointed to the horizon. In the dying, blood-red light of the setting sun, a small, dark cloud was moving towards them. It wasn't a dust storm. It was a column of riders. "They are here," Coda said. There were 7 of them. Silas Croft rode in the center, his silver-plated pistol catching the last rays of the sun. He didn't ride directly to the house. He and his men fanned out, creating a loose perimeter, just out of easy rifle range. They were professionals. "He's cautious," Coda whispered. He and Eliza were hidden in the rocks. The hunter's nest. The Sharp's rifle rested on a flat stone, its long barrel pointed toward the yard. He's sending 2 men. Eliza observed her eye pressed to the sight. 2 members of the Blackwater gang dismounted and advanced on foot, their rifles at the ready. "Let them come," Coda breathed. "They are the bait. They are checking the traps." The men split, one heading for the house, the other for the barn. The man at the house kicked open the door. "Empty!" he yelled. The man at the barn did the same. "Empty here too." Croft, still mounted, scanned the property. His eyes settled on the root cellar. He barked an order. The 2 men converged on the heavy cellar doors. "Now," Coda said. Eliza took a steadying breath. She didn't aim for the men. She aimed for the horse. Croft's horse. Crack. The sound of the 44-70 sharps echoed off the mountains like a clap of thunder. It was a big-bore rifle, a buffalo gun. The horse, a prized bay, screamed and crumpled, its front leg shattered. Croft, a superb horseman, leaped free, rolling in the dust, his face a mask of fury. "In the rocks!" he roared, firing his pistol at their position. The bullet whined, chipping stone a foot from Eliza's head. "Again!" Coda said. Crack! Another horse fell. The remaining 4 men scattered, diving for cover, their protection gone. They were on foot just as Coda had planned. "Now we wait," Coda said. Darkness fell quickly, the high desert stars emerging in a cold, brilliant display. The yard below was filled with shadows. "They will try to circle us," Coda whispered. "They will come from behind." "But you're hurt," Eliza said. "You can't." "I am Apache," he said simply. "I am the shadow." He handed her his knife. "In case I am not the first one to find you." And then he was gone. He slipped out of the rocks like water, disappearing into sand. Eliza was alone. The silence of the hollow returned, but this time it was filled with men who wanted her dead. An hour passed, a lifetime. She heard a scuffle from behind her to the right. A man cursed. "Damn it, Jed, I think I broke." His voice was cut off with a wet, gurgling sound. Silence. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Coda. Another 30 minutes. A shot rang out from near the barn. A man screamed. Then 2 more shots. Then silence again. 2 more. She was peering into the darkness, her knuckles white on the rifle stock, when she heard the scrape of a boot on stone right behind her. She spun, raising the heavy rifle like a club. A man was standing there, not 10 feet away. Not Coda. One of Croft's men, a huge bearded man, his eyes wide with surprise. He grinned, revealing yellow teeth, and raised his pistol. Eliza pulled the trigger. Click. The chamber was empty. She'd forgotten to reload after the horses. The man's grin widened. He stepped forward. Eliza didn't scream. She lunged, not with the rifle, but with the knife Coda had given her. She used the move he had taught her. Strike up under the ribs, always up. She drove the blade into the man's gut with all her weight. His eyes went wide. The pistol discharged into the dirt as he collapsed. Eliza scrambled back, gasping, shaking, covered in. She had killed a man. Eliza! Coda was beside her, appearing from the blackness. He was bleeding again, a fresh gash on his arm, but he was alive. 2 left, he said. Croft and 1 other. They're in the house. They think we're still in the rocks. They moved together, low and fast, across the yard and to the back of the cabin. Mark's cabin. Coda held up a hand. He pointed to the front window, then to the back door. He would go in the back. She was to draw their fire. Eliza nodded. She reloaded the sharps. She ran to the woodpile, took a deep breath, and yelled, "It's over, Croft. Your men are dead. Blam, blam!" 2 pistol shots exploded from the front window, splintering the woodpile. As the shots rang out, Coda burst through the back door. Eliza heard a crash, a gunshot, a scream, and then Silas Croft's voice. "Drop it, Injun, or the woman gets it." Eliza's blood froze. She crept to the front window. Inside her home, Coda was on his knees, his knife on the floor, his hands raised. The last of Croft's men lay dead by the stove. But Silas Croft was standing behind her. He had circled back. He grabbed Eliza from behind, yanking her back his arm like a steel band around her throat. He pressed the barrel of his silver-plated pistol to her temple. "I should have burned this place to the ground a month ago." Croft snarled, dragging her inside. "Let her go," Coda said, his voice deadly calm. "You or." Croft spat. "Cost me 6 good men, and a prize horse." He tightened his grip. "And you stupid woman, you had it all. You could have just left." "Like Mark left," Eliza choked out. Croft's face went blank. "Your husband was a fool. He got in the way of business, just like you." This was it. The confession, the final twist. The accident was a murder. The rustling was the motive. "You're a dead man, Croft," Coda said. "No, you are," Croft sneered. "And her, I'll—" What happened next was too fast to follow. Eliza, full of rage, stomped her heel down onto Croft's instep, hard. He roared, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Coda needed. He kicked the small wooden table into Croft's legs, sending him off balance. Croft shoved Eliza away and raised his pistol to fire at Coda. Crack! The sound was deafening inside the cabin. Croft looked down. A red stain was spreading on his brocade vest. Eliza was standing by the wall, Mark's old 4470 Sharps still smoking in her hands. She hadn't gone for the woodpile. She'd gone for the rifle. Croft stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then he looked at Coda. He fell to his knees, then flat on his face, dead, his silver-plated pistol clattering on the floorboards of the house Mark had built. Silence. The siege of Turner's Hollow was over. The sun rose on a slaughterhouse. The first light, a pale, watery pink, crept over the jagged line of the Dragoon Mountains, illuminating the yard of Turner's Hollow with a cold, unforgiving clarity. It revealed the human wreckage of the night. Bodies flung by the finality of death lay contorted in the dust. One by the barn, one near the woodpile. The large, bearded man, the one she had killed, lay in a dark, sticky pool by the rocky outcrop. 4 more were scattered between the porch and the empty cattle trough. And inside the cabin on the floorboards, Mark had lay Silas Croft, his brocade vest. Once a symbol of his false refinement, now just a ruined, bloody rag. Eliza and Coda sat on the top step of the porch, saying nothing. The silence was heavier than the battle had been. The night had been a cacophony of roaring guns, splintering wood screams and curses. The morning was silent, save for the buzz of early flies and the mournful cry of a distant hawk. They were both exhausted, every muscle ached, and they were smeared with a grotesque mixture of dirt sweat and the blood of other men. Coda's gut wound had reopened slightly. A fresh, dark stain was visible on his binding. The gash on his arm from the final fight was deep, and he had tied it with a strip of cloth from a dead man's shirt. Eliza stared at her hands. They were raw, bruised, and stained. She had scrubbed them at the pump, but she felt they would never be clean. She had taken a life. She had driven Coda's knife into a man's belly and felt the terrible visceral release of his life. She had expected to feel remorse, guilt, or sickness. She felt nothing. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. The woman she had been 6 months ago, the one who grieved Mark with tears, was as dead as the men in her yard. "It's over," she whispered, the word sounding alien absurd. Coda slowly turned his head. His face was a mask of exhaustion and pain, but his eyes were clear. "He is gone," he said. "But they're not," Eliza said, nodding to the yard. What do we do? We tell the sheriff. We tell Sheriff Miles. We tell him what happened. It was self-defense. He'll understand." Coda gave a short, harsh laugh that turned into a cough. He spat a dark speck into the dust. "He will understand," Coda said, "what his eyes see. He will see 7 dead white men, a dead white woman's ranch burned down, and an Apache, a renegade. There is no story you can tell Eliza that will stop the rope. They will call you a liar. They will say I was your lover, that we killed them all, that we killed your husband too. They will invent a story that fits what they believe." Eliza's heart sank. He was right. The terrible, unjust truth of the world they lived in settled on her. There was no law for them. They had defended themselves. They had rid the territory of a monster, and they would be hanged for it. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice cracking. "We run. We just leave them here." "No," Coda said, pushing himself up with a grunt of pain. He stood on the porch, a grim, bloody-handed surveyor, and looked over the battlefield. "We do not run. We finish. We do not give them a story they can twist. We give them the truth, but we give it to them on our terms." He walked stiff-legged into the cabin. He stood over Croft's body for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he bent and pulled the silver-plated pistol from Croft's dead hand. He checked the cylinder. Still loaded. He walked back out onto the porch and held the pistol out. Eliza flinched. "This," Coda said, his voice a low growl, "is the gun that killed Sarah. I have dreamed of this, of holding it." He stared at it, his thumb caressing the smooth, ornate grip. Eliza saw the battle in his eyes, the temptation. This was the symbol of all his hate. He could keep it. He could become the man who carried the silver pistol. "Revenge," Eliza said softly, "is a ghost that never stops feeding." Coda looked at her, then back at the gun. He remembered her kindness at the well. He remembered her terror and her courage. He had been fighting for the dead. She had been fighting for the living. He nodded a single sharp dip of his chin. He walked not to the well, but to the edge of the property, to the deep, jagged arroyo, the same canyon where Mark's broken body had been found. He stood at the edge. He did not look at the gun again. He simply opened his hand. It fell turning end over end, catching the morning light one last time before vanishing into the shadowed depths. It made no sound when it landed. Coda returned to the porch. The emptiness in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, hard purpose. "Now we work," he said. It was a long, gruesome morning. It was the work of butchers. "Hitch the wagon, Eliza," he commanded. She moved her body, responding to orders, grateful not to have to think. She backed Bess, who was skittish at the smell of blood, into the traces. Together they began the task. They dragged the bodies one by one to the wagon. Croft, his 5 men. They were heavy limp. When they were done, Eliza looked at the last man, the one by the rocks, her kill. "What about him?" she asked. Coda looked at her. "He was yours. It is your choice." A cold wind blew down from the mountains. Eliza thought of Croft's smirking face in the general store. She thought of his threat. "A warning," she said, her voice like flint. "He stays. Let them find him. Let them see what happens when they come here." Coda nodded. He understood. They loaded what little they had. Water skins, the last of the jerky and coffee, her tin of carbolic acid, Coda's knife, and Mark's 4470 sharps. Coda, using a piece of charcoal from the cold stove, took a piece of clean packing paper from McPherson's store. He looked at Eliza. "What do we tell them?" Eliza took the charcoal. Her hand was steady. She wrote not as a victim, but as a judge. Sheriff Miles Silas Croft was a murderer. He ran the Blackwater gang. He killed my husband Mark Turner for this land and made it look like an accident. He murdered a woman named Sarah up on the Gila River. He came here last night to kill me. He failed. This is not a crime. This is pest control. His men are in the wagon. Their names and bounties are probably in their pockets. You can thank us for cleaning up your town. We are gone. Do not look for us. A widow. She paused, then added, and a ghost. They drove the wagon toward Prospect Creek, a long, slow, grim procession. They skirted the main road, staying in the low arroyos, finally approaching the town from the south as deep twilight fell. The town was alive, its saloons spilling yellow light and tinny piano music into the street. They waited. They waited for hours, hidden in a stand of mesquite, until the last drunk had stumbled home and the last lamp was out. The town slept. Under a sliver of moon, Coda guided the wagon into the center of the main street. He stopped it directly in front of the sheriff's office. He set the brake. Eliza got down. Her heart was a drum. She walked to the back of the wagon to Croft's body. With a steady hand, she pinned the note to his vest. But she didn't use a pin. She took Coda's long-bladed knife, the one she had used to kill, and drove it through the paper and deep into the wood of the wagon floor, pinning Croft in place. A final, unmistakable message. They didn't look back. They unhitched Bess from the wagon, Coda climbing up behind Eliza. They rode south, then turned east, back toward the Dragoons, back toward the hollow. They arrived just as the sky was beginning to grey. They stopped on the rise overlooking the cabin. Mark's cabin. Her home, her prison. "It's not a home," she said, as if reading Coda's mind. "It's a graveyard. I can never sleep there again." "A ghost needs no home," Coda said. He slid off the horse. "But it must be cleansed." He handed her the tin of kerosene. Eliza walked into the house for the last time. She looked at the bloodstains, the overturned table, the shattered window. She looked at the small, empty bed where she had spent 6 months drowning in grief. She took nothing. Her past was ashes. She poured the kerosene on the floors, on the curtains, on Croft's bloodstain. She walked out onto the porch and poured the last of it on the steps. She pulled a match from the box, struck it on the heel of her boot, and tossed it. The whoosh of the fire was a hungry, living thing. It devoured the dry wood with a roar. Flames, bright orange and yellow, leapt into the pre-dawn sky, a pillar of fire that could be seen for 20 miles. Eliza Turner watched her old life burn to the ground. She felt the heat on her face, and for the first time in a year she did not feel cold. She mounted Bess in front of Coda. He said nothing. They turned east toward the mountains. As they crested the ridge, Eliza took one last look back. The fire was a raging star on the desert floor. Then they were gone. When Sheriff Jedediah Miles, a grizzled veteran with a weary face, stepped out of his office, at dawn coffee cup in hand, he stopped dead. His street was blocked by a wagon filled with dead men. He saw the note pinned by the savage-looking knife. He read it, his blood running cold. He read it again. He knew the name, Silas Croft. He knew the Blackwater gang. He'd suspected, but he'd never had proof. He looked at the bodies. He knew some of the faces from wanted posters. "Sweet Mary," he whispered. He gathered a posse. She said, "A widow," he told his deputy. "She means the Turner place. Ride hard." They rode for 2 hours, following the plume of black smoke they had all seen at dawn. They arrived at a smouldering ruin. The cabin was gone, collapsed into a bed of glowing coals. The barn was untouched. The well was silent. And then his deputy, a young man named Peterson, was sick. "Sheriff, over here." Propped against the rocky outcrop as if he were just resting, was the seventh body. The one Eliza had killed. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the men, a look of surprise frozen on his face. His shirt was caked with dried blood from the massive wound in his gut. It was a statement. It was a warning. It was the most terrifying thing Jedediah Miles had ever seen. They left him for us," Peterson stammered. "Who Eliza?" another man asked. "That slip of a girl, she didn't do this." "Then who did—" Sheriff Miles looked at the tracks. A single horse, 2 riders, heading east into the impassable rocks of the Chiricahua Range, Apache territory. He looked at the ruins at the body. He looked back at the note in his hand. "And a ghost." "God help them," Miles said. "God help who, Sheriff? Whoever's fool enough to go looking for them," Miles said, turning his horse. This is done. The case is closed. Croft and his gang killed each other over spoils. That's the story. You understand?" The men, unnerved, nodded quickly. The story, of course, did not end there. Prospect Creek, freed from the Blackwater gang's shadow, began to breathe. People stopped locking their doors. But a new story began. It started a month later. A new gang of rustlers, thinking the territory was wide open, tried to move in. Their leader was found, a week later, not dead, but tied to a saguaro cactus, his boots, guns, and horse missing. He walked 20 miles back to town, half mad from sun and thirst, babbling about a shadow that moved and a woman's voice on the wind. A year after that, a family of settlers, their wagon broken, was stranded in a flash flood. They huddled on a small island of rock, sure they would die. At dawn, the water receded. They found a fresh-killed deer on the bank, and their wagon. It had been pulled to high ground. The tracks were of a single, unshod horse. They called him the Hollow Ghost. When a miner, drunk and mean, cornered one of the saloon girls in an alley, an arrow, black-fletched in a style no one had ever seen, embedded itself in the wall an inch from his ear. He sobered up fast. The legend grew. A phantom guardian, a spirit of justice. The townspeople never knew the truth. They never knew that high in a hidden mountain valley, a valley with running water and green grass, a lost soul and a young widow had found a place where they belonged. They were not healed. They were too broken for that. But they were whole. Coda taught Eliza the Apache ways, how to track, how to listen to the earth, how to move without a sound. Eliza, in turn, was his anchor. She was his purpose. His kindness for her had turned his vengeance into protection. She still had the sharps. She became a dead shot, the overwatch, the hawk in the sky. He was the shadow on the ground. They were two ghosts finding their life, not in the past, but in the present. They had been turned by kindness, forged by violence, and bound by a loyalty stronger than blood. And in the canyons and deserts of the Arizona Territory, they became what the law couldn't be. They became a legend. The Old West is filled with stories of violence and revenge. But the truly great legends, the ones that last, are the stories of transformation. The story of Eliza Turner and Coda isn't just about survival. It's about two broken people from two different worlds who found a common humanity in the face of true evil. They didn't just get justice, they became justice. They prove that kindness can be as powerful as a bullet, and that the greatest legends are born not from hate, but from healing. If this story moved you, please help us keep these legends alive. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a great Western, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story from the forgotten annals of the Wild West. We'll see you out on the trail.